Hello there, my name is Bea, and you're listening to the Biologist of It, where we get the gist of what it is that biologists do. And if that sounds like something you'd enjoy, be sure to click the follow or subscribe buttons somewhere on your digital device, whichever way they work, so you never miss a show. And this week, I am joined by the social media sensation, Plant Prof himself, Dr. Vikram Baliga, all the way from Texas. Hello, Vikram.
Hi, how's it going? I'm so excited to get to talk to you today.
Yay! Thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to have you as my first guest on this podcast because you are the first person who invited me on a podcast
Yeah,
a while ago.
and honestly, I mean that one was so good, and it's still sort of a crowd favorite. So I was grateful you were willing to come talk to me. So that was pretty fun.
Oh, yay! That's so good to hear. Actually, I never sort of followed up with. Did anybody actually listen to
Oh
that? But
yeah, yeah, it did pretty well. People and you know what? It's interesting doing the podcast thing because we're so used to looking at numbers and stuff, and that's all exciting and fun. But then like I really gauge on how much feedback I get from people. And I remember on yours, people just talking about how delightful they thought you were, and
oh,
talking about how like, can you have her back sometime? I was like, oh, I will figure that out.
oh, that's so sweet to hear. I think that's generally the thing I hear on Twitter. It's just that I come across as very wholesome, so
You do.
which is really funny because I think maybe I have like an internet personality. If you wouldn't mind, just giving us a quick introduction to yourself, I think you'll do it better than me.
Sure. So, yeah, I'm Vikram Baliga. I am a lecturer of horticulture, which I struggle to say that word. Like, there's too many like R's in it. Like lecturer of horticulture at Texas Tech University. I'm also the manager of our teaching greenhouse and horticultural garden here on campus. So it's about just over a hectare of um, garden space, and I was going to try to convert square feet into something metric, and it's not going to happen, but about 20,000 square feet of greenhouse space. So it's pretty big. And I have 3 degrees in horticulture. My undergrad was in landscape design. My master's was in tree crop production. I studied olives for oil production. And then my PhD was in urban water conservation. So lots of plants all the time.
And as we know, plants are cool.
Plants are cool. Yeah, plant
Yeah,
people are cool too.
yeah, absolutely. So I was wondering if you wouldn't mind giving us kind of like a snapshot of what it is that horticulturists do, like on a daily basis.
It's interesting because my little corner of horticulture is, I do a lot of teaching. I teach here at the university, and so at least personally, a large part of my job is talking to students and teaching students about the sort of basics of horticulture. I teach introductory horticulture. Um, the rest of my job is overseeing this facility, so I make sure that all of our plants are healthy. That my staff, or let me back up. I manage a staff, and they make sure that the plants are healthy. I sit in my office and do podcast interviews. Uh, and then we work on planting displays and things like that. So we have a public garden here as well as like a in the university teaching garden. And I think a horticulturist in general, probably it's such a wide open sort of vast field. They could be doing anything from like genetics and gene research for a big ag company or a big ag tech company, to landscaping or growing food or owning a flower shop. We have sort of a diverse field that we can get into. I like to think of horticulture as sort of applied botany, in the same way that you could go get a degree in, say, biology or something, and then go be a zoologist and go take care of animals and work with animals. I like to think of horticulture in the same sort of way, that we learn botany, we learn how the plants work, and we take that information and apply it to actual growing systems.
Someone who sort of studied botany from the very um, bottom down approach of how the nitty gritty works. Actually, that's something that I try to differentiate a lot. Is botany is kind of like plant science is kind of like the ins and outs of the inner workings, and horticulture is more whole plant based. And I think
Mhm.
both of them are great approaches to take to really understand how plants grow and work.
Absolutely, and I've very much been an applied scientist my whole career. I did a little bit of basic science more in my um, master's degree, looking at some of the physiology of olive trees and things like that. But most of my work has been in the applied side. Okay, it's funny because I ran a landscape company for a couple of years and installed gardens and landscapes and things like that. And people would ask me about, oh, why are you planting this plant? And in my mind, I'd studied the biology of it, of how it works and all that. And but like the homeowner doesn't care. they, they just want to know that their plant's going to grow and look pretty. So I could talk about, well, the plant does well in a dry climate or a hot climate. And in my head, I'm thinking because of the type of respiration and metabolic processes and all that. But at some point, like, they just cared about the applied side, and so it's been an interesting sort of rounding in my career that, I think has made me in some ways more effective in my communication to students and, just general science communication.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think that's something that I can relate to a lot in that I do a lot of work with farmers more than
Mhm.
landscape. And ultimately the question is, how is it going to affect the yield? That's the be all and end all of what I do really. And so I can go away and say, oh, well, it has so many more branches and has so many, the flowering time is so different. And people are like, okay, but am I going to get more crop for my money at the end?
Right.
What is it that you're sort of researching at the moment? Are you working on a particular project at the moment?
So I kind of have a couple going, and in my position right now, I don't actually have a formal research appointment. That being said, the university is more than happy for me to do research and apply for grants and things like that. They're
Of
not gonna
course.
tell me not to do it. Um, so the work that I'm doing right now is through one of my grad students in controlled environment horticulture. So we're looking at hydroponics and aeroponics and comparing the two in a production system, looking at both lettuce, which is sort of a standard crop that I think a lot of people start with when they go hydroponic. But we're also now just starting a aeroponic strawberry project where we're looking at different ways to grow strawberry plants, fruiting plants. Okay.
We've used the words hydroponic and aeroponic
Yes.
really briefly. Would you mind giving me a
Mhm.
quick description of each of those?
Yes. Okay. So hydroponics is if you go back to the Greek roots, it pretty means water working or water doing. So it's growing plants without a traditional soil. So that would be like where you put the plant roots in the top of your fish tank and the roots grow down into it, or you put it in a pond or whatever. So essentially, you're using moving water or deep water, so more pond type water, to grow your plants and without the use of actual soil. Right.
Great.
Um, Aeroponics is similar, except that the plants are not sitting in water. Generally, how an aeroponic system works is they are suspended in some way. The way we're doing it is we've got big plastic tubs and we have them set in the lid. And then you spray water and nutrients onto the roots at certain intervals. And then you give them dry down time. So your water volume tends to typically be a little bit less with aeroponics because they don't have to stay sitting in water or you don't have to have it flowing constantly. So it's sort of two takes on the same basic idea of growing things without soil.
That's so interesting. And it's a real buzzword at the moment that I've noticed a lot of, especially with people who have limited space in their house having hydroponic systems.
Mhm.
My friend's boyfriend has just started one like in their living room where he's growing plants up the wall in this like filtering. So it's very
Mhm.
impressive.
Hmm. That's
Yeah.
cool. And so that's one area of focus that I'm sort of getting more into is controlled environment agriculture, greenhouse growing of different crops. I also have a little project I started because of TikTok, which I know sounds crazy. Um, but there are all these plant hacks out there, and it's like, do this, and your plant will be 3 times the size. And anyone can say anything on the internet, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And they do. And so I picked a set of some of these plant hacks. You've probably seen like where people put banana peels in water and let it sit for 20 minutes and then water their plant. They're like, it's okay. And in my head, I'm like, there's no way that's extracting enough nutrients and blah, 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 blah. But again, what people want to know is, does it work? And so I'm doing a little comparative experiment using arugula in the growth chamber, looking at different fertilization treatments, a couple of standard ones, and then some of the more zany ones that you see on the internet to see if they actually affect plant growth.
That's such a great idea. I've seen so many of these plant hacks recently and just thought, I can't believe that people have decided to do this and film it and put it on the internet for people to see. And
Uh
then
huh.
I wonder how many people are actually trying to replicate it. So it's really interesting to like that you're actually going to be doing this. What are some of the fertilizers? So this is the growing medium that you're using. What are some of the ones you're trialing?
So I'm using 5 different treatments in my trial. So there'll be a control that's just water, and then I'm going to use an over-the-counter inorganic, synthetic fertilizer as one of my treatments because most people they buy a plant, they're going to go buy Miracle Grow or whatever from the store, put it on their plants, have it grow.
Yeah.
The other 3 that I'm trying, and these are some that I see fairly commonly. The first one is banana water, which if you've been on my Twitter or my TikTok, you've heard me yelling about it.
Yes.
Um, the basic idea is that you chop up banana peels and put them in water and heat it for like 20 minutes, and it's supposed to extract enough nutrients from those banana peels to fertilize your plants. And you see it everywhere. Some people say no, leave it for 24 hours. Some people I have found a range of like boil it for 20 minutes and then put it directly on your plants as soon as it's cool, all the way up to no, you have to leave it for a week, which at that point you're almost making more of compost tea, which is an actual thing.
Yeah.
Uh, so I've decided what I'm going to do is sort of shoot in the middle. I'm going to boil the banana. I'm going to feel really stupid doing it. Uh, but
It's all
I'm
for
gonna boil the
TikTok.
banana. It's all, yeah, all for TikTok, all for the clout. Um, I'm gonna boil the banana peels for 20 minutes and then let them sit for 24 hours,
Okay.
before I strain it off and then irrigate with it. So I'm gonna do that. I found one that was similar in some ways, and this guy used oatmeal and a tea bag and brewed it for, like, again, 20 or 30 and then watered with that. So it's and the one of the claims that is made in a lot of these is, "Oh, you don't need to go buy those store brand fertilizers, just make these at home." And so that's kind of the take I'm going with is, okay, does it actually compete with the over the counter stuff? And then the other one that I see a lot is starch water. So like after you rinse your rice grains or boil your potatoes or whatever, you use
Right.
that water to irrigate. So those are the 3 I'm going to go with for this first trial. I'm going to run it about 30 days in the greenhouse, and then I'm going to do some comparative analysis on the size of the plants, root mass, and root density. I have a photo imaging program where I take a picture of it and it counts pixels and can tell me sort of the overall root size and color of the plant. And then I'm also going to do hopefully a little bit of spectrophotometry and figure out what's dissolved in the different treatments, like what's the actual nutrient content of the treatments.
That's so thorough. I love it. It's like,
So I'm trying to do some like real science with
yeah.
it, So I've got I'm doing and I don't know if your listeners care about the nitty gritty of it, but I'm doing a randomized complete block design. I'll have 3 blocks of plants, plants per treatment per block, and I'm going to replicate the whole thing 2 or 3 times this summer.
Wow.
So
Yeah. So this is proper. I'm sitting down. I want to know, how
mhm.
will you feel if the banana water turns out to be really good?
I tell you what, I have thought about that a lot. I'm gonna have to make a lot of apologies on the internet. Be like, "Okay, listen, all you folks that I said were crazy, like, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
it works." Um, I don't foresee that happening, uh, but I'm also willing to be surprised. I'm a scientist, and I actually did a TikTok this morning about having to challenge my own biases in science and how hard that gets sometimes as a scientist to really like, okay, here are the things I think I know. But the basic process of science is taking the things we think we know and think we understand and putting them through the ringer. And so this is an interesting kind of fun way for me, if nothing else, just to check myself with the information that I'm putting out there.
Yeah, great. I love that. That's very scientific of you. Instead of just screaming at TikTok,
That's
and then formulating a 3 replicate, fully formalized, all the equipment experiment to say, no, I am right and this is stupid.
Oh, and I tell you what, though, if I'm right, I'm going to be completely
Oh,
insufferable.
I can't wait. And if people do want to keep up with your TikTok journey, where can they find you?
I am at the Plant Prof on TikTok.
Excellent. Yeah. And I 100% can recommend following Vikram on TikTok. It is a daily hilarity. So now we're going to come to the bit that I'm most excited about, which is using pop culture references to explain what it is that you do, because this is a technique that I have been using for a while to explain what I do to the general public. And I've been met with quite a lot of thanks because when I
Hmm.
use the words that I would normally use with the scientific community, it's sort of like straight over their heads. So when I asked you to say who you would reference yourself as a pop culture reference, I immediately loved it, and I can't wait for you to explain why. so who is your pop culture reference?
Mark Watney, space pirate. S- So, have you seen The Martian or read The
I have
Martian?
not. It's on my reading list, but I
Okay,
understand the preface.
it's very good.
Yes.
Uh, I very much enjoyed it. In fact, it apparently, and I don't know if it's the reason I enjoyed it so much, but it's very much my sense of humor, the writing and the style. In fact, a friend of mine was reading it, and he texted me one day and was like, "Did you write this and you just didn't tell me?" So it's very much my like, it makes my brain happy because it's very much my sense of humor. But the basic premise, without going too much into it, it's been out a while, but so spoilers if you haven't.
I have to
Uh,
put a spoiler alert at the beginning of each of my
yeah,
my
yeah.
episodes.
So this guy gets stuck on Mars, the first manned mission to Mars or whatever, and the premise of the book is that all of the scientists that went and all the astronauts were cross trained on in multiple fields. So he is a botanist and an engineer. And he gets stuck on Mars, and he's got to figure out how to feed himself for until they can get back or whatever, whole big thing. And so, in the book and movie, he grows potatoes on Mars, and he goes through this whole thing of figuring out how to grow potatoes. And sometimes I say horticulturist, and people just look at me. Okay, so, part of my job would be if I was stuck on Mars, figuring out how to grow food. And they talk a lot in the book, and the science is actually okay. It's a
Yeah.
book, right? It's a fiction novel, but the science is actually not bad on most of it. And they talk about okay, you've got to figure out how to make sure there are appropriate soil microorganisms in this Martian soil that doesn't have what we have, and controlling temperature and water and all these things. And so the process of Matt Damon's character in the movie, Mark Watney, figuring out how to take an environment that doesn't traditionally grow plants and make it grow plants is sort of a big part of what I do in controlled environment ag. How do we take an old shopping mall or apartment building or something that's abandoned that okay, plants don't grow in the middle of the shopping mall. How do we do that? How can we turn urban centers into places where we can grow food? How do we take empty city lots? I work a lot with community gardens and things like that. And so, how do we take like an empty city lot that maybe has had stuff spilled on it for years and years and has bad soil and turn it into something that can produce food for a community in a neighborhood? So, that for me is probably the most spot on uh, pop culture reference I can think
That's
of.
brilliant. So if we were to put you on Mars and leave you there with your arugula experiment, how would you go about setting up a system where you could continue to do your TikTok videos?
I need probably a really good antenna. So the basic things you would need would be a water source, a recirculating water source, and talking about space travel, this is something they actually do a lot of work in. Is you have a limited amount of, and NASA is doing work right on this right now in the International Space Station. Okay, you have a limited amount of resources and water is heavy. It's hard to lift water up into space. So how do you recirculate water, whether it is from like waste products or just water that's already run through the plants. How do you trap enough? So, I would think you'd have to have some kind of a system to trap in any transpired water that moves through the plant system, on some kind of a canopy to catch it and recirculate it. You'd have to have some kind of filtration system that would take in any foreign pathogens or anything and clean them out. You'd have to have light. How do you get enough light is probably a big challenge. So, we use LED lights in the greenhouse when we need to. And then also, how do you start the baby plants? How do you propagate it? How do you store it after you harvest the food? So there's a lot that goes into it. So I think the first thing I would do is figure out a water source and a light source, and make sure that I could provide at least those two things for our plants, because I know that even if the soil doesn't work, I can grow things just in the water.
Yes.
And then come up with a nutrient source, whether I take leftover plant material and make some kind of a compost pile and turn that and work through that. So it would be complicated. I think a lot of times about that. Like if I was the guy stuck on Mars, if I would just like lay there and wait for Mars to reclaim me, or
You become your own plant compost yourself.
yeah, just you know what? Just take me back. I'm
Yeah.
done. This is tiring. I don't know.
So, one of the words that you use there that I just want to quickly grab onto is transpiration. So, this
Yes.
is obviously I know what this is, but just for because it's a very planty word. But for the listeners who might not know what transpiration is that something you could give us a quick overview on?
Sure. So the roots of this word come from it's to happen or to do, or transpiration would be the process of making or the process of happening. So essentially, this is the process of plants pulling up water from the soil or whatever they're growing in through the root system, moving them through the plant's system, using some of that water for photosynthesis, using some of that water for other things, and then releasing it into the environment as vapor. So essentially, transpiration is the process of water moving from the soil through a plant and into the atmosphere.
So it's sort of like I always visualize it as drinking water and then weeing it out at the end.
I mean,
It's
yeah, pretty
essentially
much.
plant weeing.
I mean, yeah, yeah, pretty much. It's the plant just, using what it needs and then getting rid of the
Yeah,
rest. It's fascinating though. At least I think I realize that I'm a nerd and I'm okay with it. I've come
you're
to
in
terms
good
with that, and
company.
I
Yeah.
like being a nerd. Yeah. Uh, but this act of transpiration is this incredibly powerful vacuum pump system, right? And it's all about pressure differential. So if you've got more water pressure in the soil than inside the plant, some of it's going to move into the roots just through osmosis. But then we've got these leaves that have the little openings on the bottom, the stomata, that open up and release water vapor and create even lower pressure. And essentially, in a 100-meter tall redwood tree, they're pulling water from the farthest roots, which may be 200 meters from the base of the tree, all the way up through the tree, up to the top leaves. And from for something that's completely passive and sort of that the plant just does, it's incredibly powerful. It moves thousands of gallons or liters of water a day, and uh, so it's something that we don't think about, but that literally cools the air around you. It puts humidity into the air. On a large scale, creates clouds and weather. That's why some of these cloud forests and rainforests have their own weather patterns, because of the transpiration of the plant. So it's something that most people never even consider, that's integral to life on this
No, and
planet.
I think it's a big part of that is people don't know that they're doing it. That these plants are literal straws, passive
Yeah.
straws. That's all they are. No. And they're sitting around, and if you have them in your house, you notice a humidity change throughout the house wherever you've got them, and they just create this really wonderful environment around them because of this.
And if you've ever been outside on a hot day and you find yourself under the shade
Yeah,
of a tree, well, it's cooler not just because of the shade itself, but because of this humid, cooler environment. I mean, part of the point of transpiration too is to help cool the plant off. It's kind of like us sweating as well.
peeing and
It's a
sweating.
response to heat. Yeah, it's really gross. Uh, uh, but you stand under a tree and it's cooling itself off and cooling the environment around it off as well. So you end up with these fascinating little microclimates under a large tree. And it's just, I don't know. Plant biology is fascinating to me. One, because it's so alien to anything that we do, and the way that plants live and function and even communicate to a certain extent is so alien to what we do, but it's something that happens all around us all the time and that we have to have happen to live on this
Yeah,
planet.
absolutely. I couldn't have put it better myself. And I'm really grateful that we are moving into a more of a conversation where plants are at the center and it's not plants as a habitat for cute cuddly things living, and more plants are also really interesting in their own rights. And why don't we see what it is that plants can actually do? Thank you.
Yeah.
That was really lovely. So I wanted to touch a little bit as well on, you talk about urban reclamation. Can you talk a little bit about that in terms of, we're going to flip this now. So you're Mark Watney,
Yeah,
and you've
sure.
been put in a say a supermarket or something, an area that you want to reclaim. What's like the first step in your process there for getting it ready to make food?
Sure. So, kind of the similar things that I would do on Mars. Any hostile environment sort of to plant growth is I would make sure there is a growing medium, whether that is uh, a box of marbles or clay beads or water or soil, something for the plant to grow in. Air, if we're doing aeroponics, it's variable. I would make sure that there's a water source and light available. Those are kind of the biggest things. We can find different ways and recycle plant materials to make nutrients. We can do a lot of things to make plants grow, but there's not a substitute for light, whether it's the light of the sun or an LED light or whatever. There's not a substitute for that, and there's not a substitute for water. We can find other sources of other things. So those would be the first two things. So, say we're in the inner city somewhere and we're trying to figure out how to feed a neighborhood that and I don't know if this is a conversation as much in the UK, but we talk about food deserts here in the US, where there are large portions of our population that um, don't live, within a couple of kilometers of a supermarket or a fresh source of food. So a lot of urban areas and rural areas as well are what we consider food deserts because they don't have a source of fresh food, and everything is packaged, and that has its place for sure. I'm not anti that, but one of the big conversations again is how do we take some of these urban environments and turn them into food production. And so, yeah, I would make sure that I had the basic things a plant needs: media of some kind, water, light. Um, Goodness knows we have plenty of carbon dioxide around, and more
Some
than
would
we want.
argue, yeah,
Yeah,
maybe too
yeah,
much.
yeah, maybe a little too much. And then I would start thinking about power and infrastructure and all of that, because one of the challenges with growing somewhere that is not outdoors in the soil is you have to have a power source because you have to recycle water, you have to turn on a light, you have to do all these things. So having a power supply. Personally, if it was me and I was running this project, I would look into wind and solar power. So even if there's problems with the overall grid, even if electricity is expensive, you can sort of power your own systems. Um, and then a big thing, and this is important to think about too, is I'd figure out who's going to run it. Because a lot of these projects and I've worked with multiple community gardens. We have one, our department actually owns some land in a neighborhood here in town that was donated to us that we run a community garden off of, and that's my
Oh, that's
project along
great.
with my staff. It's really cool. It's about a double lot. I don't remember exactly the size, but it's fairly large, and we grow tomatoes and peppers and squash and fruits and things like that out there for the community. But a lot of these projects start because someone is very passionate about it and they get into it and they start it and it gets going. But then what happens when that person moves? What happens when that person gets a new job and doesn't have the time? And I see more community gardens and community agriculture projects start and fail because there is not a plan for sustainability in terms of manpower. So who's going to help? Who is going to go in there and harvest things and change out water and add nutrients. Um, and so I'd start to build a coalition of people, uh, preferably people that live in the neighborhood where it's being put in, that have some buy-in to the project, and start working with them to, one, create jobs in a neighborhood, but two, make sure that these projects are sustainable long term. So that is something, again, that people don't think about, is how do we sustain a project long term? And people think, oh, we need money, oh, we need this, and all those things are great, but what you really need is people who are interested in the project.
And you say about this is actually something that is not particularly common in the UK, the idea of having, do you call it a food desert?
Yes,
So
yes.
in the UK, we're a tiny island with a big population. So actually, I think that will be a surprise and not a surprise to many of my listeners, because we all have at least a co-op, like a small shop down the road from us.
Mhm.
And of course, America is vast. The US, the whole of America is vast anyway.
Sure.
But the US is a huge space, and there are lots of small communities dotted around all over the place, which makes sense. There's plenty of space. Take it up.
Mhm.
And you never think about that. What's the logistics of starting a new community in a space when you can then be 3 hours away from the next nearest town or further?
Oh, for sure. And just to put things in context, so I live in Texas, and if you overlay, and everyone should Google this just because it's funny, overlay a picture of Texas over Western Europe, and Texas is bigger than France, and it's about the size of Western Europe. So we're a heavily agricultural community, right? The part of Texas I live in. And I live in a fairly large city. We have about 300,000 people here where I live. So uh, but it's very spread out. Like, we're very spread out. There are towns that have to drive at least an hour and a half to get to a grocery store with fresh produce. And even though they're agricultural, they're growing large scale commodities like corn or cotton or things like that. So even a lot of them don't have a home garden to get food from, and so they have to drive a long way. And when I say drive, our speed limits here are what, 80 miles per hour. That's what, 110 kilometers per hour, something
Wow.
like that.
Yeah.
We drive very fast and very recklessly, and even at that, it takes 60, 90 minutes sometimes to get to the closest real shop that would have fresh produce. And so it is a complex issue, and we like to largely consider ourselves to be super, and this is a whole, again, I don't want to get too off the rails, but like, for me, food systems are a big thing. And so a lot of the research and the work I do is in how do we shrink our food systems? How do we make regions or towns or counties, or however you want to look at it, more food independent? Um, because honestly, if you so from where I live to get to the coast of Texas, I could drive for 10 hours and not get to the coast. And a lot of our citrus and a lot of our squash and stuff is produced down there. So it's a 500-mile drive. And technically you can do that in a day, but what if for whatever reason trucks can't run? How do you get those things? So a lot of the work I do and that I want to do is how to make local food systems more resilient. And I think um, hydroponics and controlled environment kind of stuff is a big way to start addressing that.
Definitely. That sounds like such important work. And while that's not so much an issue in the UK, one of the things that we are seeing at the moment is um, inflation going up incredibly quickly. The cost of living is wild in the UK at the moment. A pack of butter, um, this like big news today. It's on the 5th of July, if anybody's listening. The packs of butter are £10 right now, for one of our brands,
Wow.
which is a lot of money for butter, branded or not.
Yeah.
I'm expecting there to be at least truffle oil in it. It's going to be that much. Um, and that's one thing that I think we're starting to look at here, and that it's really important that people understand the difference between having these systems for whole communities and having them for themselves. Because I'm seeing
Hmm.
a lot of people moving towards having allotments in their garden or allotments on their balconies, even, and expecting that within a couple of years being able to be some level of self sufficient. That's a horrible word. Um, and it's really not feasible to be able to produce your own crops. I think we don't realize how much fresh food we need and how much we eat when we're given it.
100%. And, this is a very popular thing on Instagram and TikTok and even Twitter is that people are starting small farms and things like that. And I think that's wonderful. I think people that can homestead and grow their own food it's great. And I think to the extent that we should all be trying to supplement our food supply with things we grow ourselves, if possible. But what a lot of these things don't show, one is the amount of time and effort that goes into it, and in a lot of cases, the amount of money you have to have up front to make that work. Um, Not that you can't do it cheap; it's possible, but I think of people that live in flats or apartments or in urban areas where okay, maybe you don't have 3 hectares of land to grow your own food for your family. Now what? Do we just say, "Well, that's your fault for living in the city?" No, I think we have to look at, again, these community level efforts that, okay, if you can grow your own food, that's wonderful, but, okay, could you also maybe go sell things at an affordable price at a farmer's market? Um, because people think farmers markets, and yeah, that's great, and I love farmers markets. I was on the board for a farmers market for about 3 years. Um, but the prices are not it's a lot more expensive than going to the grocery, and that's fine. But I think we have to start looking at this of not how do I just grow food for myself, but if I have the ability, how do I help take care of my community? How can I take care of my neighborhood and my friends and my family who maybe don't have the luxury or the privilege of having a backyard garden or an allotment, like you say, to grow their own food. So a lot of these things are very aesthetic and it's nice, and I love to watch the videos on TikTok and Instagram too. It's fun for me. But in the back of my head, I'm like, okay, how do we work on the policy level too? How do we work on the community organization level to actually make sure that all the people around us and all the people on this planet actually have food to eat? It's kind of a big deal.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that. Was really interesting way of delving really deeply into something that I didn't realize was such a huge issue. Yeah, you've taught me something really new and important there. I had It's one of those things that I'm not surprised exists, but when you're outside of the sphere of knowledge, you just don't know is going on. But of course, it makes sense.
Well, and that's what makes what you're doing here so important, right? And the work you do just throughout social media and all of your is people don't know what they don't know. And I say this all the time to my students and to the people that I will occasionally do a lecture on social media communication and things like that. Um, it is impossible to care about something you don't know about,
Yes.
right? So there's a lot of complicated food and horticulture issues out there that most people have no reason to have ever heard about. Like unless someone like you or me uh, figure out how to communicate that. So I think what you're doing is so important because it sort of maybe opens a few people's eyes to, oh, this is a complex issue. This is something that I should think about even just a little bit. And I think that trickles down to the food choices we make. It makes us a little bit more grateful for the food that we do have. Less things go to waste. And I think the root of almost every problem we deal with is education,
Yes.
is equitable education for people, and so I think these things that can go out to the masses are so important.
Definitely. And on the topic of that, this has actually flowed really nicely into my next question. That you are a great communicator and you do that both in your podcast, on TikTok, on Twitter, and also teaching. And you won the Texas Tech University 2021 Diamond Award for teaching innovation, which is amazing in of itself, but also because this was during the pandemic. How is it that you approach teaching that makes it so innovative? What's your goal with teaching?
So, what's interesting is this award was a surprise to me. I didn't even know it existed, for one thing. It was news to me. Um, but I never felt like I was doing anything that wasn't a necessary part of my job. And I say that because so I come from and I don't, you and your listeners may not know a ton about it, but I come from extension, which is sort of our public ed in we have what's called land grant universities in the US, and there was a big act in the early 1900s that granted land for agricultural research to universities across the
Okay.
US. And so pretty much every state in the United States has something called an extension service, which is sort of the public outreach and education wing of university research. So they take the research that's done in the university settings within the ivory tower and take it out to the people that need it. They do science community. So I worked for that organization for about 4 years. And so I come from that. Um, and I have always felt that the best way to empower people and have equity in a society is to make sure everyone has good access to real true information. That is at the heart of my teaching philosophy. And so I think that education should go where the people are, whether it's on their phones, whether it's on TV or TikTok or whatever. I don't pick up all of these like new social media things because I need another thing to do. I do it because that's where the people that need the information are. And there's so much misinformation out there that like it's even more important to be in those spaces. So when the pandemic hit, we left for spring break in March of 2020 and we never came back. They were like, "Oh, we're gonna have a 2 week spring break. It'll be fine. We'll come back." So it went from we're gonna send these kids off for 2 weeks and then come back to well, we'll see you in August. And in that 2 weeks, we had to figure out as a university, how do we take all our material for classes that were not intended to be online and put them online, which my department has been doing for about 15 years already. We offer completely at a distance undergraduate and graduate degrees, master's degrees through our department. So we were kind of like, well, okay, it wasn't too bad. But for a lot of folks, that was a big challenge. There are professors that can't even check
No.
their email, and
Oh, I know
it's a problem.
them.
We've all had them.
Yeah.
Um, and so I, during that, live streamed all my lectures. I recorded all my lectures and put them online. And even the subsequent 2 semesters, I have live streamed every lecture. I record them. I post them online because there's still plenty of COVID going around, and there's still, and even beyond that, there are students that for whatever reason struggle to access the classroom. It could be a physical disability, anxiety, some sort of learning issues. There's a myriad of reasons where some students learn better from home than they do face to face. And again, I feel like education should go where people that need it are. So I tried my best to do um, every type of media that I could so my students could get the information they needed to be successful. And then also, as part of the course, I've integrated science communication. So their final project for the semester, every semester, and please understand, this is a large class. I have about 150 students a semester, and they are usually freshmen and about 98% non-majors. It is
Right.
a core
Yes.
science course, right? Not
No.
plant people. Um, so at the end of the semester, I have them either write a sort of like popular science blog style article. They can do a 5 to 7 minute podcast episode or a YouTube vlog style or whatever they want to do, or a 3 minute TikTok. And they have to pick one of the topics we discussed from the class. I give them some basic ideas, and then do a little science communication piece on it because regardless of what field they end up in, whether it's plants or anything else, they're going to have to figure out how to communicate quickly and effectively. And I feel like that is the way that my class is built. We essentially take, and whether they know it or not, we essentially take them through the scientific process, the process of coming up with an idea and vetting and evaluating that information. And the place that we fall short in the scientific community is closing that feedback loop
Yes.
and doing the communication piece. So I feel like that's the capstone of the class. They learn about the science and how the science works, and then they learn about how to communicate it to the world
And
around
that's
them.
vital, I think. We take so much money from the public and from the government, and anywhere else, and we do all of this cool stuff with it, and then we say, cool, thanks, and we publish it in a paper that no one reads.
That is 100%
And
it.
so it's no wonder that when I sit down with people and I say, I'm a computational plant scientist, they say, A, what is that? And and B, what could you possibly be working on? Um, there's just a complete disconnect, and it's so important to sit down and just communicate this with not only each other within our fields, but outside our fields, and more importantly, the people who are ultimately giving us the funding. It's our duty to tell them
That's
what it is that we do.
100%. And I've always felt like, what other field can someone pay for a product and then we just ultimately say, "Okay, we used your money and we built a car, but you can't
Yeah,
have it." You know what I mean?
absolutely.
Like,
Like, the,
or let's pay another $30 every time you wanna use that car, and paywall it, and we're not gonna tell you how to drive it, and all of the instruments are in a different language, and good luck.
research is one of the wildest things that I have come across in in my 28 years. And I'm really glad that you mentioned about not only during the pandemic, but before that, you were doing all of this teaching um, with remote viewing, especially mentioning that this was partly for your disabled students, because this is something that I'm really hoping will continue post pandemic. Because I think if I had had my time again at university, it would have absolutely changed my dynamics. When I was at university, so for people who don't know me, I'm actually hearing impaired. I'm relying on lip reading for this interview. And
Oh,
um,
wow.
when I was at university, if I'm looking down taking notes and the person carries on talking, it's a nightmare. So I would have to put a tape recorder, which makes me feel very old. But I had to put a tape recorder at the front of the class. And but the ridiculous thing was it was also at the discretion of the professors. So if I asked, please can I record this? I'm deaf. I need to listen to it back later so that I can take notes and have it really loudly in headphones. Sometimes they could say no, which is
Mm.
absolutely bizarre. So I'm really thankful that as we're moving forward, we are starting to think more about that, and that will mean that we will get more people into science ultimately who are from lots of different backgrounds, and we'll get great talent from everywhere. I just want to um, sort of wrap this up with now something a little bit off piste from what we've been talking about, a complete 180, but I'm really excited
Hmm.
to end with this because I feel like when you ask this question to any biologist, they always have a really cool answer depending on their organism of choice. But what is your favorite plant? Or you could also give me a really cool plant because I know that they're not always the same thing.
Yeah. So we've talked about this before, and actually, you designed a logo for my podcast. So if you go look at my podcast, uh, uh, you have designed the logo,
Thank
which
you.
is wonderful. It's one of my favorite things. So I love bristlecone pine trees. There's two or three species of these long-lived pines in the western U.S., Pinus longeva, and there's two or three others. But these trees, we don't actually know how long they can live. The oldest ones we know of, we think, are 5 or 6,000 years old, and we don't actually know their upper limit because no one has seen one planted that's been this. And so they have this brilliant genetic memory that spans human civilizations and multiple human civilizations, our entire recorded history, one tree. And it's fascinating to me that, and I'll try to make this kind of quick, but they there is a pine bark beetle that is native to the same range as these pines. And about 10,000, 12,000 years ago, during the end of the last ice age, these beetles were driven out of their native range by the glaciers as they came down through the western US. And as climate change is warming that part of the country up, they're moving back through the ranges of all these pines, and all of these shorter lived pines are getting decimated by them, just totally destroyed. But then they go after these pines that are 5 or 6,000 years old, and they're 2 generations away from having seen these
Wow.
beetles before, whereas other pines are 100 generations. And they still have the chemical defenses in them to take care of this species that's been gone for 10,000, 12,000 years. Because they're so old, they remember biologically how to defend
That's so
themselves from them.
crazy.
So we see almost no pine bark beetle damage on these longleaf pines and these in the Great Basin of the U.S. And it's incredible to think about.
Yeah,
Just
and there's
incredible.
me. I can't even remember what I did yesterday.
Yeah, no, me same,
Thank you so much for
same.
joining me today, Vikram. It's been an absolute pleasure. Where can people find you if when they want to find you? Because I'm sure they will.
Oh gosh, all over the place. I'm the Plant Prof on, Twitter and, TikTok, and then if you search for Planthropology, the handles are a little bit different because people beat me to a couple of them, but it's Anthropology with a PL on the front, so it's a pun, Planthropology, but I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and just look for the, Bristlecone Pine, and that's me.
Brilliant. And
So
I'm going to put links to lots of the things that we've talked about today on Instagram and Twitter at Biologist of It, if you want to come and find me over there, so that you can see some of the things that we talked about and delve a bit deeper into all things Bristlecone Pine. Thank you so much. I've been B. Vikram, you've been wonderful. This has been the Biologist of It, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye.